Now we're at chapter 32, an R3 guttural verb. In these verbs, though, we're going to exclude final aleph and final resh. So basically, when we talk about an R3 guttural verb, we're talking about a final chet, a final ayin, and a final hey with a mapik. It's got to have a mapik in it. So those are the verbs that we really want to deal with here. And with a guttural in the final position, the real weaknesses here that we're going to see is that if there is a sere thematic vowel, or let's say a shuric thematic vowel, or any other type of thematic vowel other than a patach or a kametz, then the guttural is going to want to somehow pressure the thematic vowel to become a patach. Remember, as you go back again to chapter 5 and section 7, it talks about how the gutturals act. And one of the problems with the gutturals is they prefer a guttural they prefer a patach either under them or before them. And therefore, if the thematic vowel is something like a sere, that sere is going to be in trouble because the guttural is going to want to conform that sere into something like a patach. So that's the problem we're going to have. And so as we look at the thematic vowel chart that you've looked at in the past, we can see some of the problem areas that we're going to have. Look, for instance, at the PL. Now, anywhere where you have patach, it's okay. There's going to be no problems. But everywhere where we have the green, those are going to be real problems that the R3 guttural is going to want to conform these greens into reds, into patachs. Now, obviously, the communist forms are very happy with an R3 guttural because they're red all over the place as it is, and therefore R3 gutturals fit in very well with the communist platform. So no problem there. The problem, again, is going to be where the green areas are. And there we're going to have a problem, and we need to look at how to deal with that. And so as we look at section 3, I talk about those strong areas. And again, in that chart I was showing you, everywhere where there's already red, that is a strong area, and there's going to be no problems for you to learn that. The next thing we want to do is look at the remedies for the weakness of the R3 guttural. And again, we're basically going to be looking at sere thematic vowels, but we'll also look at other types like hirik yod also. So as you look at section 4, notice I'm going to divide up these forms now into two forms. We're going to talk about a finite verbal form, and that's defined as a perfect, imperfect, or an imperative, or a non-finite form, and that's basically your infinitives and your participles. And so as we think about these verbs, we want to think about them in terms of finite verbs and non-finite verbs. And so the first thing we want to do is look at finite verbal forms, perfects, imperfects, and imperatives. And we want to look at sere thematic vowels. And so if you look at section 4, I talk about in non-pausal forms, sere thematic vowels become a patach. And you can see I give you examples. First, in the left column, I give you strong verbs like a ki tel. But then I give you an R3 guttural verb like this. Bika, you would expect it to be something like this with the sere. That's what it should be, but the guttural in the R3 position exerts its influence, and what happens is it ends up as a patach. And then I give you another example with a hithpael. Again, you can see the sere thematic vowel under the tet, but again, you can see how it is changed into a patach under the kof, under the R3 guttural verb. But now let's talk about pausal forms. If we were to take this form here, and all of a sudden we've got what we have here is a finite verbal form, but in pause, then the pausal form will allow us to retain the sere. So when we go to a pausal form, we can retain the green thematic vowel. But when we retain the green thematic vowel, the guttural is still not very happy about that, and so what it requires is a furtive patach, and that's what I'm adding here, a furtive patach. Again, you may need to go back to chapter 5 and review the rules about furtive patach. Obviously, if you were to have a form in which there was some type of ending here, some type of vocalic ending, then the ayin not being in the final position, you would not get a furtive patach. Furtive patach can only occur at the end of a word. Any type of shurik here or anything like that would make it to where the furtive patach was unnecessary. But as you can see here, if we go with a pausal form, it brings back the sere that you're used to, but we have to add the furtive patach for the guttural to be able to pronounce it well. This is really like a vocalic glide to sort of get you into the guttural. You have to sort of slide into the guttural. It's like going into second base. You better slide. You don't just go up standing up. And so you have to slide into gutturals also in Hebrew, and that's why you need a furtive patach. And so there you see it. All right. Now about a hirik yod thematic vowel. And so if you look at the number 3, you can see the strong verb is like hiktil. But now suppose we have an R3 guttural. We're going to have, we'll do a perfect. We've got this hirik yod, and remember, hirik yod is historic long. And as a historic long vowel, it will not change to a patach simply to satisfy the ayin. And therefore, you've got to slide into that guttural, and what you'll get is, again, the furtive patach. And so there I write the furtive patach. Next, we look at the non-finite forms. And when you look at the non-finite forms, they are like pausal forms that we saw before. Namely, when you deal with a non-finite form, like a infinitive or a participle, what you're going to do is you're going to end up throwing around a lot of furtive patachs. And so you have a form like shaloach. This would be a call infinitive construct. You have that holum as your thematic vowel, but obviously the gutturals are not comfortable with any thematic vowel before them but a patach or a kametz. This is a holum. This is a non-finite form, and therefore you will get the furtive patach as you see here, and you say shaloach. Now, if you notice, I do give you an exception at the end. There are some exceptions. The Genesis 8:10 form that I give you there, that's an exception to the rule. But by and large, this will hold out very well, and so keep that in mind. If you look at section 5 now, we have final considerations. And the first consideration is like R2 guttural verbs. Almost all R3 guttural verbs have patach as the thematic vowel. And so the way we would write that, of course, is this. So for the call of R3 guttural verbs, we can predict the thematic vowels. It's almost always going to be patach for your imperfect imperative. So again, I will not give you that information. Of course, this also would imply that there can be differences again with your imperative 2ms and your call infinitive construct. Call imperative 2ms and the call infinitive construct. They can again be different forms. Before they've always been the same. Again, they'll be different like we saw again with your R2 guttural verbs. The next thing I need to point out is the T-form participle. And again, the T-form participle, kotelet, looks like this. There's your kotelet form. And again, when you see this, you really want to think of the melech formation of the seglet nouns. Because when we go to a guttural, the guttural is going to act, again, I'll do cursive there, like patachs, like this. And again, this is like na'ar. This is like, again, the seglet form with the R2 guttural here. And so that's what you're seeing here with the T-form participles. And so watch out for that. That's a very good form, and you need to be aware of that. The third consideration is that R3 gutturals have no problem with silent schwa, and that's pretty important at times. And so if you see a word like shalachti, you can see that we have the guttural in the R3 position. It's in the silent schwa position, And usually you know how gutturals like to have a composite schwa, even in a silent schwa position. But you're really not going to have that problem here with these R3 guttural verbs. You'll get a good old silent schwa and everything will be just fine. So don't worry too much about that. And the fourth observation that I need to bring to your attention is a special form. And that is your call perfect second feminine singular form, which you would expect it to be this. This is what you would want it to be. But with that guttural there, it's not going to happen. And what you're going to get is you're going to get an extra patach placed in here like this. What this is really a process of segulization, really. It's become like a seglet noun. And notice that the accent is even like a seglet noun. And so really what you had here, when we were at this stage here, is the same situation in the of na'ar. You see this is the exact same situation. And so if you remember for your seglet, what we did is we inserted the patach. Well, we're going to insert the patach here too. And so really, the seglet process takes over on this one particular form, and you must, again, watch out for that. What's really unique about this form is that it keeps the dagesh lene here. This is the only time that I know of where you can have a dagesh lene preceded by a short vowel. But remember, that's a phony vowel. And so if you remember it's a phony vowel, it's really not a real vowel. It's okay. Notice how the accent shifts. It's, again, just what they call an anatyptic vowel. That's a nice scholarly way of saying something. And, of course, when students hear that, they go, of course, it's an anatyptic vowel. They have no idea what that means, but it's a phony vowel. Okay, so remember that. One other form I do want to point out, and I mention it in a footnote, and that is in the hifil. If you remember in the hifil, there's special seire forms. And those special seire forms in the hifil will obviously be influenced by the R3 guttural, and therefore the seire will become a patach. The only exception, of course, would be the infinitive absolute. For the infinitive absolute form, it will retain the seire, and you will get a furtive patach before the guttural. So just keep that in mind and make sure you keep an eye on that special seire problem. Now finally, look at section 6. We're talking about the forming and parsing of R3 guttural verbs. Again, this is not very difficult. Boxes, colors, and call. Again, if you already know that, you'll do very well. But this time, when we come to the colors, that's where we'll make our adjustment, not with the boxes. And so with the example I give you, it's a nifal imperfect 3ms of shalach. And so the boxes, as I give you, of course, is going to be this. And so let me just go ahead and write that in. We'll do shalach. And so here is the box. And now we got to think about the colors. And so the colors for the nifal, of course, is what I've just written here. And this is the problem. It's the seire in the imperfect imperative. And we did not say pausal form, so the pausal form could save the seire, but this is not a pausal form. And so what's going to happen is you're going to end up with this. The influence of the R3 guttural is going to change the seire into a patach. And so that's what we're going to have. And then, of course, you can think of our call formation, the yik tol. And the yik part will, of course, give us that performative there, but that's all it's going to do. And so this is our answer, but the key is you must have a patach here. Now, if we were to change this problem, make it pausal, what we would do is we would preserve the seire, and then we would put a furtive patach. If it were a pausal form, that's what we would get. So this is, again, the R3 guttural verb. And again, as I describe it, the Hebrew world goes red. Everything, the patach is taking over and into areas that are green. And where it cannot totally conquer, well, it still gets to furtive patach. It gets at least some tribute, as it were, to use a good Old Testament analogy. And so, again, look over those charts, and it will review what you have in the chapter. And that's it for the R3 guttural verbs. Now it's time for you to do the questions and the drills.